Hey everybody, it's Tuesday. Welcome to class. Hope y'all are having a wonderful day so far. We have 4 weeks until the AP exam. In fact, only 7 classes left to prepare. And the good news is that we have finished up our first topic, which is on control structures, variables, and methods. Learning how to write methods that solve specific problems based on some sort of class outline. Really happy with the work that you guys did on this, especially the curveball that I threw you of including string methods the last one. You should have gotten some feedback from me on Sunday, and it might be a good idea to read that and just kind of see where you're at on that one. We'll probably come back to control structures a little bit the week before the AP exam because the AP people have told us that there will for sure be one control structures problem on there. And they've also for sure said there will also be a problem on either arrays or array lists. They haven't told us which one yet. Now, those are 3 of the 4 types of question that one might normally get on the AP exam. And the fourth type is the ability to write a class in a very particular way in Java. Now, classes are not going to be on the exam to the best of our knowledge so far, but it is another good way for us to practice method writing. And I also really like the idea of just covering and making sure that we practice everything in this course, even if it's not tested on the AP exam, so that you're not at a disadvantage to any other student that's been out there. And we've held true to that so far. You guys covered all of the material that would normally be on the exam in a regular year. It seems to me that we could take one day to address a question type that might pop up on the AP exam itself. And I don't think that the things that they ask you to do are outside of our comfort zone or our knowledge. It's just the format for writing a class tends to be a little bit different than maybe what we've done before during our in-class time. So they will practice 2 writing classes FRQs. I'm actually going to guide you quite a bit through the first one while you do the second one a little bit more independently. And I think this is a good starting point before anything else. Go ahead and pause your video. And I really just like you to answer questions 2 and 3. That one should be next to if you're writing a class in Java. But I want to know if you were writing a class in Java, what's the basic structure of the class? So think a little bit, maybe draw a little picture. What should a class look like? What components will all classes have? Go ahead and pause that video, answer it on your own, jot it down somewhere, and then when you think you've got that, press play again. So a few things that we might want to keep in mind when we're looking at any class in Java, and hopefully you remember this since we've seen them more recently in when we were writing methods, we were kind of filling in these methods that already existed within a class. So we're always going to start with public class name at the top, whatever that class name is, right? Whether it's string shorten or frisbee team or freight train or whatever, it's going to say class name at the top. Directly underneath there, we'll have some sort of private variables that we'll use to keep track of information within the class. Your class is going to need to keep track of some things. You'll need to put some private variables at the top. You'll need a constructor, and your constructor should always set the value of all the private variables. Either they give you a parameter or you give it a default value like 0. And you're going to have some methods with a specific return type that you'll write down, like public static int at number, right? So when keeping those in mind, on the Haiku site for today, you'll see a couple of things of interest. Your actual assignment is on Google Classroom, and what I'm going to talk about kind of answers the first FRQ that's on there. And there's a little document on writing classes advice that might be helpful for you. Take a look at. The advice from our bell work I've put at the top of this directly, and because the AP exam is open note, you're welcome to use this as you answer any class questions during class today. You'll need to write public class file name at the top. Look at the constructors to see how many variables you think this requires, as you'll define your private variables. Some reminders when you're making your constructor. You've given it parameters to match the private variables. You'll make sure it satisfies any specific conditions you're getting, and make sure you're saving the parameters into the private variables and not vice versa, right? A little example of this would be, we want it to be number equals number underscore. On the left being my private variable and number underscore being whatever parameter is given. Be the other way around. And maybe before you do anything else, I suggest writing down the names of the method write down what return type it has and what parameter it takes in. And just like we do with any other good method that we write, if we'll define our variable of the appropriate type and write the return statement at the bottom before I forget. So if it says public static int, I might write int count equals 0 as the first line. I'm going to return count at the bottom, and I'll write everything else around that. Because oftentimes when you write a method on the AP exam, just doing those two things alone is worth at least 2 of the 9 points. You'll complete each method to the best of your ability. This are the 4 steps that you want to keep track of and document as you write a class. And here's where it starts to get a little bit funky. The way that the AP exam asks you to solve these problems is by giving you a table that has all of the methods with specific parameters on the left with examples of how they might work, all the return values of these specific method calls, and a comment that explains how it's working there. And our goal is to glean each of the 4 points that we came up with already from these statements. We've got 4 steps to take care of and glean from this table. Write the class name, write the constructor, write the methods, figure out what the private variables are going to be. I recommend, first things first, when you're looking at a table like this, to save the private variables for last because they tend to be the most complicated part, and you'll have to think what you're keeping track of as you work through your methods. So, first things first, we'll need to write the class name at the top. I like to look at the first line of the table because it almost always has the constructor with the class name up here. Class name step tracker. So we've got that down. File name step tracker. Next, we'll write our constructor. We'll leave a little bit of space between the class name and the constructor to eventually write our private variables in. The constructor for this class, step tracker, is name step tracker. And what you want to do is look at the constructor and see what parameters it has. In this case, the constructor for this method has 1. And here's what that number means. Days with at least 10,000 steps are considered active. So we're having some sort of number that tells us what the number of steps to consider a day to be active, and that's what that parameter represents. So I made a note to myself right here before I even started to code what the name of the constructor is and what its parameter represents. Next, I said I want to figure out the methods, I want to figure out the return type, and any parameters that it might have. Okay? I see 3 methods here. I see active days, I see average steps, and I see add daily steps. So let's take a look at what this table can tell us one by one. Active days, value returns 0, which is an int. So when I'm writing about these methods, the first thing I'm going to note is that active days returns an int. Average steps might return 0.0. It might return 7,000.0. It might return 9,000.0. This gives us the average number of steps per day. As you can tell in the comment, and it returns a decimal, so it must be a double type. It's going to be public double average steps. One of the things that they're really testing that you can do is write the return type from looking at the table. And add daily steps doesn't return anything. So it is a class. It's a void type. So we know that this is going to say public int active days, public void add daily steps, and public double average steps. Now, we need to be able to keep track of a few things, which is what our private variables are for. And the first thing we said when we made the constructor was we'll need a private variable for the number of steps it takes to be active. So this is private variable number 1. We'll know we'll need at least 1 step with that. Okay. average steps, the average number of steps per day is the total divided by the number of days. So this requires total steps and the number of days, which makes me think that we're going to need two variables for that. We'll need the total number of steps, which looks like an int, and we'll need an integer for the total number of days. Add daily steps doesn't really seem to return anything, so it probably won't need any private variables. But active days returns the number of active days. Look on the right over here. Of the 5 days for which step data were entered, 2 days had at least 10,000 steps. So this requires the number of active days, which is another private variable we'll need to keep track of. So I'm going to put a little bold in front of it so we know which it is. Active steps. This is the number of steps that are required to be active. Total steps. Active days. Your total days of exercise. I think that judging the private variables is the hardest part of this, because you need to ask this question of what you're going to need to keep track of. And in most of the assignments that we've done, we've written the methods, but we haven't kept track of private variables ourselves so far. Now, since this question format isn't on the AP exam, I'm not going to freak out about it. But I think it's a good thing to keep in mind. What we're really most worried about is writing these methods such that they function properly, and you do need the proper private variables in order to be able to do that. So if you go to Google Classroom and you open up our assignment, take as long as you want on this one, but the table that I just showed you how to break down is the problem for our first one. Write the step tracker class and see how it goes. Take as long as you want on that and try it out. It's a new question format. I want to see what you come up with. When you're done, if you look at bullet point number 2 on Haiku, you can look at the key in the rubric and you can see how your answer compares to that. And I would say at this point, email me and ask questions if you're not quite sure about the structure of classes based on what it says there. It's okay if you didn't totally figure it out. Okay? Then there's a second FRQ that I'd like you to test yourself on. It's on a class called Game Spinner that requires you to write a constructor and 2 methods, spin and current run. There's a table in the middle that's really similar to the first one that you should be able to break down now. If it helps to make notes, just like we did for the first one, about 1, 2, 3, and 4 before you actually write it, you could be a good idea. You could do it with comments in your code. Like that. I'd like you to take 22 minutes on this one. This one will be for a 5-point grade. And just like we've done with everything else, you can click the key and grade yourself with comments when you're done. FRQ number 2 also requires the use of a random integer. So just letting you know, there's 2 examples here about how random number generators work, in case you need to take a look. That's your goal for today. We're going to move on to arrays and array lists on Thursday, but I want to see how comfortable you feel with writing a class like this, because I think it's good practice, even if this exact question format won't show up on the AP exam. Thanks for your hard work, and good luck.